So today I'll be talking about my film PM and how my product follows film and genre conventions, as well as how it represents social groups and issues. As our film is a paranormal horror, first of all I'll be talking about its typical conventions, which can be found in media film. And then I will evaluate on how well we have followed these conventions. This includes the narrative, which is the storyline, the camera work, the editing, sound, and mise-en-scène. Firstly, the narrative. So to start off, paranormal films usually focuses on encountering a supernatural being through a unique location or an item, which the main character stumbles upon. These main characters are often in a group of people or a person that is in a vulnerable position. Moreover, these groups of characters will normally come apart due to accidents or death. In the end, this leads to one or two vulnerable characters. Most paranormal films also have a backstory, which is where the movie is based on. This could be a backstory of the location, the supernatural being, as well as the past trauma of the main character. As a result, most paranormal film follows a mostly linear storyline with few flashbacks in the movie. These films also focus on psychological impacts of the character's trauma after encountering their supernatural being. For our movie, I think we have quite successfully followed the narrative conventions in almost all aspects I have mentioned. Firstly, our film was inspired by a story from a ghost radio podcast. The story was about a school building that burned down many years ago, which took the lives of many students and teachers. And then many years later, a student accidentally enters the building that was burnt down. It results in her getting haunted by the ghost. In our movie, we took inspiration from this as we found the story very fascinating. We took the concept of the burning teacher who came back to haunt the students, and then we worked around that in the storyboard. Our ghost's backstory is that she had passed away from the burning building. As a result, she will haunt people who enters her area, which is her classroom, as she felt jealous that all of the other people didn't have the same traumatic experience as her. This aligns with the conventions as our film consists of a backstory of the location and the ghost. I think that we showed this very effectively. As a result, this gives us more depth in the movie. Secondly, our main character only consists of one person. However, they did start off as a group of friends in the beginning of our opening scene. As a result, our main character, who is a vulnerable person, is left alone and encounters the supernatural being all by herself. Our main character, which is Pim, is in a very vulnerable position, as you can see in our story. She's also seen as the weakest in her group of friends, which consists of two other characters. This also lines up with the narrative conventions. We also did slightly touch on the trauma of the main character after she encountered the ghost. This is when we included her scream right where the camera cuts and the title shows. The scream represents her psychological state of mind and her shock. However, our opening scene isn't linear, as we didn't want to show the backstory of the characters yet. If we had the chance to make a whole film, we would definitely include a backstory for our characters, which could make our movie more non-linear. In conclusion, I think we have followed these conventions quite successfully from the narrative aspect. Next is the camera work. Some shots that can be easily found and identifiable in paranormal horrors are, firstly, high-angle shots. This is done to show the character's vulnerability. Showing the character from a high point make the character visually look smaller, which makes them seem more powerless. This shot is usually used on the main character. Secondly, static shots are usually used in paranormal horror films. This is because it creates a sense of unease and helps build up the mood and atmosphere in rising tension. Combining these types of shots with compositional techniques such as the rule of thirds or symmetry could be used to create tension and anticipation in the movie, and also create a more appealing look overall for the audience. Thirdly is the use of point of view shots, which put the audience in the character's shoes and makes the audience feel the same tension and uneasiness as the character. Moreover, there are also uses of hidden surveillance cameras or CCTV in general to show the sense of mystery. Furthermore, there are uses of subjective camera movement such as handheld shots, which shows the shakiness and disorientation. These shots are usually used when the movie is in its peak tension. This provides fear for the audience. For scenes that are building up tension, paranormal horrors will use long takes and continuous shots. This is because using long takes can provide anticipation for the audience and can reveal more narrative information by prolonging the shot. The audience will also get a more immersive feel. In our movie, for the camera work aspect, I also think we followed these conventions quite well. To start off, we used a high angle to imitate a CCTV camera. We did this to show the main character in a vulnerable position as she gets haunted by the ghost. Usually, a very high angle can also make the ghost seem as if she is controlling and toying with the main character, which has fell asleep. The high angle also shows how she is very weak physically and mentally. We also combined the use of composition with static shots. For example, the shot that our main character Pim is walking in the hallway, we used rule of thirds to composite our shot. We did this to show the darkness of the room in contrast with the outside hallway where she's walking. This builds up tension and anticipation for the audience as well. This is because they can only slightly see the opening of the room. Moreover, for another shot, which is where Pim is sitting alone in an empty room, we use symmetry of the chairs stacked on a table and centered Pim right in the middle. This shot mirrors the emotion of Pim as all the chairs represent all the things that is happening in her mind, whereas the empty desk represents how she's left alone by her friends. This shot also gives a more immersive and authentic feel for the audience, which builds up the tension and anticipation. However, in our opening scene, we didn't use long takes. This is because we didn't want to anticipate the audience for too long, as it is only an opening scene. We stuck with static shots, which is more of a traditional way of filmmaking. We also didn't use subjective camera movement, as we wanted to keep the mysteriousness and eerie mood. One camera shot which I think was unconventional in our film was the tilting overhead boom shot. We did this to represent how the character is entering her sleep paralysis phase by moving the camera up. The tilting in the shot also represents her disorientated mind. This shot was unconventional because I think it was a unique shot in this genre that I haven't seen before. I took inspiration from the ending shot of Breaking Bad, where Walter White dies. This shows how his soul is basically leaving his body as he dies. This mirrors our movie as our character's soul is moving into the sleep paralysis phase, where she is taken control over by the ghost. This represents the concept of sleep paralysis overall, which is the theme and the name of the movie. Next is the editing. Paranormal horrors often include flashbacks and backstories to show the supernatural being's origin or the location in general. This gives more narrative information for the audience. As a result, this adds to the complexity and layers, which makes the movie more interesting. These movies also often vary in editing pace, as it changes with the increased tension of the movie. For example, at the start of the movie, the pace could be more slow, which builds up the anticipation for the audience. As the tension rises and reaches its peak, The pace of editing will be very high as it shows the quickly unfolding events in the story. Jump cuts are also typically used to show disorientation and uneasiness. This will also make the audience feel the same way, as they wouldn't really know what is happening. Moreover, they often include found footage or the CCTV of the main character encountering the ghost. This creates a mysterious atmosphere and also builds on the anticipation for the audience. Furthermore, there are uses of distorted reality by using effects such as glitches or jump cuts. This creates disorientation. Besides that, color grading is used to signify mood and tone. Paranormal horrors usually have a very cool color grade. This represents the fear, which creates uneasiness for the audience. This moreover represents the mood and tone of the movie. Finally, quick cuts are used when tension is at its peak, and this often results in a jump scare of the ghost. For editing, I think we did well in following these conventions. Firstly, we used a different editing pace to convey different level of tension. In the start of our opening scene, our editing pace was more slow as our characters are just being introduced. As Pim enters the room, our editing pace starts to rise, which then peaked on the CCTV scene, which had very high tension. We also used jump cuts combined with a glitch effect to represent a distorted reality between paranormal and real life. As you can see in the CCTV scene, the ghost keeps appearing and disappearing, meanwhile moving positions every time there's a change in shot. We did this to show how the realms of paranormal and real life are transitioning and merging with each other. This also creates a sense of disorientation for the audience. Here's a comparison between our inspiration and what we were able to create. In the jump scare scene, we quickly transitioned from a black screen to a close-up shot of the ghost. I think this jump scare was very effective as the audience will not be prepared. As a result, this creates suspension. However, for color grading, I think we didn't quite follow the conventions, but rather challenge the conventions. Our color grading was more warm, with hints of color blue and green. A warm color grade can suggest safety, which is what the school is supposed to be. However, in our movie, the school is not necessarily a safe place as a character encounters a ghost. This juxtaposition creates the disorientation in the movie and unexpectedness for the audience. This could also link to social groups and issues because the school is supposed to be a safe place for all of the students. We did add hints of blue and green, which could suggest that something bad is about to happen. For sound, paranormal movie pays extreme attention and detail. This is because it is very important in creating the desired mood and atmosphere of the story. Ambient noise is typically used to create the base layers of the atmosphere. These sounds include sounds of wind, footsteps, and all the details in the scene. Silence is also used in moments, followed by a burst in sound, which is a jump scare. This catches the audience off guard. A use in silence combined with static shots can also create an uneasy and eerie mood. Discordant melodies are also used to create a sense of disorientation in the story. This builds on to the overall tension. These discordant melodies are usually created by synth. Sound designers also pay close attention to syncing sound with shots. These cues create an impactful moment for the audience, which adds to the depth of the movie. Unsettling sounds are also used in paranormal films by using instruments such as water phones and playing instruments using unique techniques. This can create unsettling sounds. Moreover, there are uses of effects such as reverb or delay, which further adds on to building the depth of the atmosphere. There are also uses of soft sound, such as whispering. This creates tension and suspense for the audience. This could also be an enigma code. In contrast, there are also used of very loud sound effects such as screaming or jump scares. These sounds are usually played at where there is peak tension. In my opinion, I think we followed the conventions of paranormal horror for sound very successfully. Firstly, we used diegetic ambience noises. Since we recorded our dialogue with a condenser microphone, I thought our movie was too quiet and there wasn't ambient sounds. It was just the mood. As a result, we added a subtle and very quiet ambient sound, which we put at the base of our sound design. This also engages with the audience in some ways, as it made our movie more authentic overall. Other ambience noises we used include footsteps and the sliding of chairs. The footstep sound we used actually gives off a more eerie vibe, as our character was walking extremely slow and cautious. For the rest of the sound, I used a program called Logic Pro, which is for music production, to organize the sounds. This allowed me to add more effects and mix the sound easier. For non-diegetic sounds, I used a plugin called Omnisphere, which is a synth with included samples of other instruments. Firstly, I layered eerie, atmospheric, and ambient sounds using the synth. By using an atonal scale, this creates soft tension and an eerie atmosphere. Secondly, I used discordant melodies, which is made from a bell-like instrument. I used this melody as a recurring motif, which appeared at the start of the movie and when our main character fell asleep. I took inspiration from a lullaby to make the melody more dreamy, but also make it discordant to give a more uncanny feel. Thirdly, I used instruments such as water phones and gongs to create an unsettling sound. I also used ringing and other samples like a burning cello to add to this unsettling layer. Moreover, I also used soft sounds such as whispering, which also followed the conventions. In contrast, I used a very loud sound effect and screaming to create the jump scare sequence. By using silence right before the jump scare, this creates unexpectedness for the audience. Furthermore, we cue the sounds to the editing. For example, the scene where Pim sits alone in the empty room. As the shot changes to a longer shot, we use bells, which played a descending atonal scale. This creates depth in the movie. Lastly, effects such as reverb or delay were used to add to the eeriness of the movie. For example, for the scene where the ghosts say, "Come burn with me," we added a reverb and delay to the dialogue. As a result, this gives a more eerie and spooky feel. It could also represent how the main character's mind is disorientated. I think sound was the aspect that we were able to follow the conventions most successfully. Lastly, for mise en scène, paranormal movies usually use a haunted location as the main setting, where the characters encounter the ghost. This location could be an abandoned place or an eerie place like a cemetery or a forest. Low-key lighting is also used to create ambiguity and a tense atmosphere. Furthermore, there are recurring uses of pieces of clothing, which personally signifies each character. These clothing will also represent the theme of the movie. Makeup is also used to represent the supernatural being. Paranormal horrors also focus on non-verbal communication, especially the facial expressions of the character. These usually represent how they are feeling, which could also make the audience feel the same way. Furthermore, there are uses of color palettes, which represent the mood and the tone of the movie. Lastly, there are uses of significant and symbolic objects, which are important in the movie. In our movie, we took these conventions from other popular paranormal films and media texts. After that, we then adapted it in our own movie. Firstly, we used an abandoned school as our location. It wasn't necessarily an abandoned school, but it's a very old-fashioned school that looked like an abandoned one. This followed the conventions, as a place creates an eerie atmosphere, which could suggest that it is haunted. We also took inspiration of the location from many popular Thai paranormal films, which are usually set in a school. We also used a recurring piece of clothing, which represents the theme of our movie. Our piece of clothing were school uniforms, which represent the theme we're going for, and also represent the character. We also took inspiration from various other Thai movies. For makeup, we also used it to represent how the ghost looks like and her backstory. By creating burn marks, this represents the backstory of the burning school. We also took inspiration from a picture that we found from social media. Moreover, we also showed the reactions of characters through the use of non-verbal communication. For example, in the scene where Pim sees the ghost, her facial expression suggests how shocked and traumatic she is. Our symbolic object in the film was the phone. This was because it was where everything started. Hadn't Pim received the text that the room has changed, she wouldn't have encountered the ghost. This could also represent how she easily trusts her friend, going to the wrong places. Moreover, this could suggest social issues such as friendship, trust. Moreover, it could represent how teenagers are very keen to explore the unknown and unfamiliar places. However, there are some parts in Mise en Scène that we didn't quite follow the conventions. Firstly, our movie was set in a day, which means that the majority of a movie was in high-key lighting, with the exception of some scenes. For example, the scene where Pim is about to fall asleep. This was because we think that our lighting in this movie will represent the rising tension. As our lighting starts to transition to low-key, the tension starts to rise. This challenges the conventions of most paranormal films, as they're usually set in the night and uses low-key lighting. Moreover, our color palette wasn't similar to paranormal horror. This was because our colors were more warm than cool. This links back to color grading, where I made the point earlier that the school is supposed to be a safe place. I think for Mise en Scène, we quite followed the conventions quite well, but there were some parts that we didn't quite follow the conventions. In conclusion, I think overall we followed these conventions of paranormal movies quite well. However, if we had more time, we would definitely explore social groups and issues.